Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Coffee with Craig. I am your host, Craig DeLuz. We appreciate you tuning in to the Firearms Policy Coalition, the home in the fight for civil rights. Please take a moment to like and share this video feed so that your friends can become our friends. Also, remember, subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow our Facebook page. If you want to know what's going on when it comes to the Second Amendment from coast to coast, if you want to know where you can take action, not just post something online, not just post a comment with an unhappy face, but where you can actually take action, you know that the Firearms Policy Coalition is the place. Now, I wanted to remind you guys, we talked about this last week. These T-shirts, I know you guys have been asking about these T-shirts, our Do Not Tread T-shirts. I know you guys have been asking about them. This is the shirt that the young man in Reno was wearing when he got, how shall we say, disciplined by his school for wearing a Do Not Tread on Me T-shirt because it said firearms. It didn't just say firearms, but it said Firearms Policy Coalition. Well, these shirts have been selling like hotcakes, primarily because you guys have been asking for them. So, once again, here's where you go to get them. You simply go to fpcgear.com. That's fpcgear.com. You can order this T-shirt and see some of the other things that we have available for you. And know that every single one of these, no matter what you get, resources go back into the fight for our civil rights. So remember, fpcgear.com if you want to get your Don't Tread on Me Gadsden flag T-shirt. Now, let's get into today's topic. Now, you guys know that Phil Watson, our lobbyist, is in Washington, D.C. You know that he is meeting with folks, talking with them about how we can protect and defend our right to keep and bear arms. You know that, you like I are frustrated. We've got a majority in Congress. We've got a majority in both the House and in the Senate. We've got a president who says he supports the right to keep and bear arms. Our only question is, where's our pro-gun legislation? There's been a number of individuals who have been fighting for us, but I can honestly say probably none more vocally than our guest this morning, Representative Thomas Massie from Kentucky. Representative Massie, how are you doing this morning?
I am doing great. Thanks for having me on your show, and thanks for sending Phil here to the swamp. We've been talking about some new legislation. We're brainstorming right before we tuned in here with you, and I can't let the cat out of the bag, but we've got some ideas for some more pro-gun legislation since Phil got here.
Well, now, Congressman, give me just kind of starting off, just give us kind of a sense of where things are right now in Washington in relation to the Second Amendment and the fight, and just an idea of exactly what we can expect here during the rest of 2018.
Well, you know, everything right now, all the activity on the floor is dominated by the upcoming election. And it's really paralyzed a lot of Republicans here. They're worried about their reelection. So it's hard to get them to move any kind of pro-gun legislation, even though that's what they promised their constituents when they ran. So I don't think we're going to see much gun legislation this summer. I'll be offering amendments on every bill that comes to the floor where any pro-gun legislation would be germane, and maybe we can get something in that way. And then after the election, hopefully if we keep the majority time and get them to introduce or back some of my pro-gun legislation, which I've introduced this session.
Well, that's you know, it's really hard, and this is the worst part. The worst part for me is that, you know, I look back and I keep asking myself, can I think of any pro-gun candidate, Republican, who's ever lost their seat because of a pro-gun vote? And I can't think of any, but I can recall a number of Republicans losing their seats because they promised to be pro-gun and, well, weren't.
Yeah, well, look at the 94 congressional election, if you think back to that, a lot of people, rightfully so, place the credit actually on the so-called assault weapons ban that the Democrats passed for the Republicans getting the majority. And in 1994, you know, the Republican Revolution, they called it then. It wasn't the Tea Party way. But frankly, I think that was due in large part to the Democrats, you know, sort of overstepping and passing the assault weapons ban. Yet you've got some people here who don't appreciate how strong the firearms voting base is. I mean, you can look at the polls if you want that the left-wing media does, but frankly, it underestimates the effect that gun owners and Second Amendment advocates can have in an election. These folks will crawl through glass to vote for somebody who really is pro-gun, who does what they say. And then when they see somebody get squishy on them, they're not going to show up to vote for it. I mean, they know that Republicans can be part of the problem too. And so that's what I really appreciate about gun owners and Second Amendment advocates.
Oh, most definitely. You know, we've found in our experience that anti-gun voters are not necessarily single-issue voters. In other words, if they don't like your position on guns and you change it, they're still going to find something, some reason not to vote for you. But pro-gun voters generally tend to much more likely be single-issue voters, meaning that if you go wrong with them, if you're not on the right side of their issues, there's a big chance that they're not going to vote for you. And that doesn't mean they're going to vote for the other guy. But what it may mean is on that particular item, they may leave the box unchecked.
And I think that's a fair litmus test. We're not saying that pro-gun voters are single-dimensional, right? Because if that was my litmus test for a candidate. If you didn't understand that the Second Amendment was about self-defense and about keeping an overbearing government in check, and you started talking about duck hunters, and I love duck hunters, you know, I like to hunt myself, but when somebody asks you a question about the Second Amendment, you start talking about duck hunting, then you probably don't understand not just the Second Amendment, but the entire Constitution. So yes, gun owners are oftentimes single-issue voters, but that issue they are voting on is very indicative of other aspects of the politician they are voting for or against.
Well, okay, so let me ask you this, and this is a little bit of inside baseball. Now, my experience working here in California, working with legislators here in California, is, in particular with Republicans, they assume that because they're Republican, we assume it's just a given that they're pro-Second Amendment. And what I found is that even a lot of the members who are pro-Second Amendment really don't have a detailed understanding of firearms policy, and then how the two intersect. And so there are many times where I'm having to talk a Republican legislator off of a ledge where he's either about to introduce or has introduced legislation that it may be supported even by law enforcement, but is not necessarily pro-Second Amendment. Do you find that either sometimes, seldom, or often to be the case with some of your colleagues there in D.C.?
Oh, it's sometimes the case. And you have some Republicans up here who support the Second Amendment, but they really aren't gun advocates. Like they don't own a lot of guns or even one gun. They don't go shooting, but they're still our allies, okay? They understand it from a constitutional standpoint. And then you have folks who own guns and hunt with guns, but they don't get the constitutional aspect. And then you get some of these Republicans who think that just a little bit of gun control is okay or might even be a good thing. But all of the proposals they have fail the one single for the same reason that all gun control fails, and that is criminals do not obey the law. So if you pass another law on guns, they're not going to obey it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be criminals, right? So even the well-intended Republicans who offer like gun control light, they're barking up the wrong tree. And a lot of times they're just trying to pursue a certain category of voters, and they're going to lose more gun voters than they gain in that sort of middle ground.
So wait, I am shocked to hear this. So you're telling me that criminals don't follow the law? Does this come from a study or something like that?
Yeah, every study, every shooting, right? If you're committing murder, right? So, for instance, a gun-free zone sign, that is not going to inhibit them from committing murder. They plan on committing a heinous crime.
I always say gun-free, unless you are going to make it out of Kevlar, gun-free school zone sign is not going to protect anybody. Representative Massie, how can people follow the work that you're doing there in D.C.? Now, by the way, I just want to ask this. So I understand that you're the chair of the Second Amendment Caucus?
Yes. So when we get together, when we get together and talk about guns, I run the meetings. And the way I run that meeting is I try to bring in experts who will inform some of my colleagues who are generally pro-gun but need more information. So we've had John Lott, author of 9 books, More Guns, Less Crime, The War on Guns. Those are a couple of his books. We've had Alan Gura, the constitutional attorney who won both the Heller decision and the McDonald decision. So those are the kind of guests that we bring in, and it's really informative. It's not just a bunch of congressmen sitting around talking to each other. And they have called votes. I'm going to have to run and go vote here in a second. But I wanted to tell you about a couple pieces of gun legislation that I have introduced. I've got about 10 minutes, 5 or 10 minutes.
Okay.
One of them is H.R. 5112, and it's called the Safer Voter Act. And it stands for Second Amendment for every registrable voter. And this bill, what it does is it lowers the age to buy a handgun from an FFL from 21 to 18. A lot of people are trying to go the other direction with long guns. And that reminded me, hey, this is an unconstitutional bill, not my bill, but the law that exists that keeps you from buying a gun if you're from an FFL, a handgun, if you're under 21. Think about that. You're allowed to vote. You could be called into service to defend your military, your fellow citizens by joining the military, and yet we're telling you that you can't have a handgun. We're telling 20-year-old mothers you can't have a handgun to protect yourself. And so my bill would repeal that prohibition on 18, 19, and 20-year-olds from buying a handgun from an FFL. And I think, Craig, we've got to push back. We can't sit here and wait for the next bad piece of gun legislation. We've got to go on the offensive.
Politics is war, and war is about taking ground. You can't keep retreating and expect to win the battle.
Absolutely. The other bill I've got, it's H.R. 34. This is my 3rd term in Congress. I've introduced it every Congress, literally on the first day of every Congress. It would repeal the Gun-Free School Zone Act, which is, I believe it's unconstitutional. Basically all federal gun control is unconstitutional if you think about it. But this is a really onerous one because it sets the default in all 50 states to be that all schools, including a perimeter around them, are so-called gun-free zones that Gun-Free School Zone Act does. And so I want to repeal that so we don't have this gray area, and the default should not be that we turn our most precious, assets, our children, our future, into vulnerable targets by advertising them as being in a gun-free zone.
Well, Congressman, I just want you to know how much we here in Sacramento at the Firearms Policy Coalition appreciate you and the work that you do. I can honestly say that we have done a number of alerts, videos, talking about both pieces of legislation that you just mentioned. We are big supporters of yours and the work that you do, and we hope that you will not just keep doing what you do, but keep saying what you're saying and keep up the fight for all of us who are kind of here behind enemy lines on the left coast. So thank you so much for all that you do, and thank you for joining us this morning.
Hey, and I don't think you're behind enemy lines. I think you're on the front lines. I think that the folks who are members of the Firearms Policy Coalition are the ones who actually move the needle up here. I can talk to my colleagues until I'm blue in the face, but until they get a phone call from a voting constituent, they don't really respond much. And so what you do is so important. I wouldn't run for re-election if it weren't for groups like you who can actually push folks. Sometimes it's the right folks who need encouragement. Sometimes you're able to get the wrong folks to do the right thing. Either way, I don't care how they get to the foot of the cross, as long as they are there. And you guys are the ones who are converting them.
Amen. Preach it, brother. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in. This is the sort of stuff that we like to do. We like to bring you folks who are actually making things happen from coast to coast, about issues that are happening from coast to coast. Thank you so much for tuning in to Coffee with Craig. We are the Firearms Policy Coalition. We are the home in the fight for civil rights. Got to use them or you're going to lose them. You guys take care.
If you like our videos, follow, subscribe, like, and share.